Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to have as our special guest Ambassador Joey Hood. Currently, he's positioned out in Tunis. He's the U.S. Ambassador to Tunisia, but he's been a career hand in the Middle East for the State Department for many, many years now. I knew Joey when he was in so many different positions in Yemen, in Qatar. He was in Iraq. He was in Saudi Arabia. He's done it all, and he's been one of the finest individuals I've had the pleasure of knowing over the years in Washington and in this profession. Um, right now, we are for President Kais Saied. And moving forward now, the question is, what direction will Tunisia go and what's the future hold? And with that in mind, I'd like to open up by asking Ambassador Hood what he thinks about the grand scheme of things for Tunisia now that we are into the beginning of President Kais Saied's second term. Joey, I'll hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, Josh. I'm proud to be addressing you today as the 71st American diplomatic envoy to Tunisia. I mention that honorific because I know you're not just a fan of history, Josh, but you have a PhD in the topic. So you would appreciate the importance of the long and historic nature of our bilateral relationship. And I think it's worthwhile to lay out that history before we launch into what's going on today, because what happened before informs what's going on now and what will happen in the future. So the United States and Tunisia established our relationship more than 227 years ago with the signing of a treaty of friendship and commerce, soon followed by the US government's first overseas military engagement, the so-called Barbary Wars, and the development of a bilateral relationship that would feature mutual respect, economic exchange, and security assistance over the centuries. In fact, during the month of Ramadan in 1805, the first Muslim ambassador to serve in Washington arrived from Tunis, prompting President Jefferson to establish the practice of offering iftar at the White House. When Tunisia abolished slavery in 1846, one of my predecessors asked for the Tunisian government's advice on how this was done, despite the lack of overwhelming popular support, so that we could learn from the Tunisian experience. You can actually find that correspondence in the archives. Tunisia's geostrategic importance to the Western world, though, was not made clear just in those examples, but I think on three big historical occasions. The first was long before the establishment of the United States during the Punic Wars, when Roman generals and politicians famously obsessed over Carthage. The second was during World War II, when Hitler instructed General Rommel to hold Tunisia at all costs. Not if he could, not it would be nice, but at all costs, because of Tunisia's geostrategic importance. And the US Army, during Operation Torch, learned how to be an effective army here. And the third example I'd like to raise is the war against ISIS in this century. That terrorist organization targeted Tunisia for its caliphate and for recruitment of fighters for the front in Syria and Iraq. So the US government devoted over $1 billion in equipment and training and advisory service as well to help the brave Tunisian security forces defeat ISIS and its remnants and liberate all of its territory. The security and stability resulting from that close cooperation has provided a foundation from which Tunisia can not only develop its economy, but also export security through its support for UN peacekeeping operations all across the African continent. Recently, 130 Tunisian soldiers received the UN medal for their outstanding service to the UN mission to the Central African Republic. A woman named Colonel Sami Razwan commanded the contingent, and that's normal for Tunisian women to serve as military commanders. Tunisia's status as one of just 3 major non-NATO allies on the continent speaks to the depth of our military relationship. Of course, there have been many challenges in this long shared history, and we always confront them frankly in our engagements. most of which remain private in keeping with diplomatic practice. A great number of those challenges are shared, like humanely managing an increase in irregular migration. We have the same problem in the United States. Expanding the economy while maintaining social stability. That's a priority for us as well. Maintaining agricultural production in the face of climate change, and so on and so on. These aren't just challenges we in Tunisia face together alone, but we work closely with Tunisia's traditional partners in Europe, as well as Canada, Japan, and Algeria, to ensure that our engagement and assistance are complementary. The US government also believes a vibrant civil society and private sector are essential to any country's stability and development. And Tunisia is blessed with impressive human and natural resources in both areas. It's well known, Tunisia's civil society development goes back centuries. Highlights include someone I know you know, whose works you know very well, Ibn Khaldun, who laid the foundations for modern sociology in his seminal work, Al-Muqaddimah, as well as the establishment of, in 737 AD, of Zaytuna University, one of the world's oldest continually operating universities. Also the establishment of the country's largest labor union in 1946, and on and on. And a number of civil society organizations that were established after the Jasmine Revolution in 2011. Our assistance through civil society organizations aims to support the freedoms of assembly, expression, and good governance objectives that are enshrined in the Tunisian constitution. With the private sector, we can talk more about that separately, but we've done a lot of work over the past decade to open US markets to Tunisian exports, and that has resulted in a very healthy trade surplus for Tunisia and more American consumers benefiting from high-value Tunisian products. These are just some of the highlights of our bilateral partnership, Josh, and where I think we are now as we start out the second term of President Kais Saied, as you said, and why Tunisia is so important to the United States. But I'm sure you have other questions and directions you'd like to take the conversation in, and I'm looking forward to them.
Well, the economy is a big issue right now. The government wants to reduce the budget deficit, which is over 5 or 6% at this point, and it allows us to have a little conversation then about where we've come since 2011. What emerged from the Jasmine Revolution at the time was the Deauville Partnership. And this was a large effort of collaboration among international banks to work with international and regional governments to support the countries of the Arab Spring. And Tunisia became the centerpiece, the focal point of that financial and economic support, which petered out over a number of years. There was a lot of money invested and it did good work for its time. But there was an expectation that this would transition into other forms of economic growth and bilateral support of different countries. I know that the Millennium Challenge Corporation came very close to finalizing a program, and the IMF went through 2 rounds of cash infusion. They were planning a third loan, which is stalled out. And I believe the United States had a joint economic dialogue at one point prior to the COVID pandemic. So where are we today in terms of the government's capacity for further reforms, further economic reforms, and the international community's appetite for supporting that process?
Well, it's important to look at where we've come from, and don't worry, I won't bring you back to 737 AD this time, but you know, we have to understand that Tunisia lost about 30% of its GDP from the period 2011 to 2022, 2023. Part of that was due to, of course, COVID, like every country. Part of it was due to the fact that it was heavily reliant on wheat imports from Ukraine. And Ukraine, as you know, was invaded by Vladimir Putin. And so that set wheat prices in the wheat markets off. And so it's been one thing after another. But we have to say as well that there wasn't good economic management here by the various governments that followed the revolution in 2011. There was a lot of debate about what the government needed to look like, what the new constitution needed to look like. And there wasn't as much time and energy left to focus on the economy. I would say, just as an aside, if you look at where we were in the United States, roughly 10, 12 years after 1776, we were right at that point where we were throwing out the Articles of Confederation. We were trying to start over again too. So we know from our own experience that building up a democracy that delivers economically for its people is not something you can do overnight, and it's not linear. So Tunisia is going through that period of development now. So you mentioned some of the things that the international community came forward to do, but I would mention too that I think we did 4 sovereign loan guarantees for Tunisia as well during that period. The U.S. government did. That's roughly a fifth of all the sovereign loan guarantees we've ever done under the 1990 law that authorizes these. So the United States government provided a lot of assistance as well, technical assistance in addition, that led to things like the startup law, which is actually a great success here and is a model for other countries in the region. But obviously, it's all not been enough. And so what we've been focusing on over the past few years as the embassy and as the US government is seeing how we can bring the power of the private sector to bear here. So opening up the markets in the United States, as I said, not through any regulatory change on our side, but by doing matchmaking for entrepreneurs here, for potential exporters here, providing them with everything from English language skills to certifications that they need to enter the US market or to maybe enter niches of the US market. So now you can buy organic olive oil from Tunisia on the shelves of just about any supermarket in America. And that's made America the second biggest importer in the world. And we've only just begun. So that means millions, hundreds of millions for the Tunisian economy. And it means tens of thousands of jobs for the Tunisian people. Our best estimate is over the past 8 or 9 years, we've helped create over 80,000 jobs in Tunisia. And obviously that's not enough, but it's going in a positive direction. And these things aren't happening just by chance. We very much focused on the olive oil sector. We very much focused on exports in general. We very much focused on artisanal products. So very fine chinaware, rugs, olive wood, those little checkerboard chopping blocks you have in all of our kitchens. Most of them are made in Tunisia, or they come from Tunisia in one form or the other. And on and on. There's lots of other examples, but what that's resulted in is a trade surplus of at least $300 million a year in Tunisia's favor, and lots of jobs. This year, we're focusing through a USDA Food for Progress project, about $25 million on the date sector. One thing I didn't know coming here is that Tunisia is the biggest exporter of dates in the whole world. And so it should be relatively simple for us to help farmers here learn how to produce more, a greater variety with less water. And if we can succeed at that, then that's going to be thousands more jobs and lots more good stuff for the European and American markets, all thanks to US government support. But it's not all, rainbows and unicorns. I'm very optimistic. I see the potential here, but not just the potential, the things that are actually getting done. And I like to share those with Tunisians to help make that feeling of hope and optimism infectious. But the reality is that there is massive brain drain. There's a lot of Tunisians who are leaving the country to get higher paying jobs elsewhere. And so we need to help make sure that through our assistance, we're providing opportunities for people who want to stay here to be able to do so and to have relatively good paying jobs when they do. Um, One area I'd like to focus on as well is helping um, attract more investment from outside, because we do have over 70 American companies that have already invested here, taking advantage of the offshore manufacturing law that allows them to manufacture for export and to repatriate their profits, as long as they're employing Tunisians. And they do employ thousands of highly skilled Tunisian laborers. Um, I think there's a lot more that can be done in this area, but it requires bringing them here, those companies here, to prospect more. And that's one of the things we're going to be focusing on in the coming 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
Well, the migration is an important topic. The Arab Barometer had polls out a couple months ago where they were showing the trends over the last 10, 15 years. Going back to 2011, the poll had uh, uh, surveyed and found that 22% of Tunisians wanted to leave the country. And what they
Mhm,
found today is that 46% of Tunisians now want to leave the country.
mhm.
They found, according to their numbers, that 41% of young people are unemployed, and among the youth, among 18 to 29-year-olds, 7 out of 10 Tunisians would like to leave the country. Uh, so what you're talking about is job creation and wage growth. Um, what do you think Tunisian society looks like another decade from now? Do you think that trend is reversible? Do you think that uh, uh, the impact on society still has time to be adjusted and mended? What do you think the future holds with such high levels of outward uh,
Mhm,
talent and capital flight?
mhm. Well, I always remind myself that Tunisia exists in the rest of the broader region and the world. And so it's true in this case as well. Migration, as you know, is at record levels since World War II all around the world. So it's not just Tunisians who are on the move. Um, and so it's a phenomenon we're seeing all over the place, where people are they're trying their luck in different places. Now, one great thing about Tunisians and Tunisian culture is that it is so family centered and so socially connected that Tunisians come back. And there are, direct flights from lots of cities in Europe that you would look at and think, why would there be a direct flight from there? Well, because there's a lot of Tunisian expatriates who live there, and they come back every summer with their families. In fact, there are several ferry lines that run here and generally make their profits from Tunisians coming back with their cars, with their families for the vacations. And many of them do come back and stay after they've tried their luck in Europe, after they've worked for a while there. So there is that back and forth that I think can be beneficial to the country. One of the challenges that we've faced with the companies that we've helped invest in here through things like the Tunisian American Enterprise Fund and through our own embassy programs is that if they're successful, because Tunisia is only a market of 12 million people, they need to move in order to expand. But that's okay. That's a sign of healthy growth. As long as they keep manufacturing or other job processes here in Tunisia, well, then it's a good thing that they for them and their shareholders that they expand, even if that means that they have to leave. So I think that's the key: is maintaining opportunities here for people who naturally want to come back and participate in the economic and social life of their country.
Okay, so let's turn to strategic competition. Let's turn to the great power situation today. What is the push and pull in relationship to China and Russia that's taking place in Tunisia? And how does that match what's playing out in other parts of the region and other parts of North Africa?
Mhm. Well, I can speak just to what I see here in Tunisia right now, but in terms of so-called strategic competition, I've laid out what the United States is doing here, or at least some of it. And I think there's been a ton of tangible benefits. And these go back decades. I keep turning to history here, but the United States helped build the airport. The United States helped build dams and all sorts of infrastructure back when Tunisia really needed that help. We've since moved to technical advice, to opening markets, working with the private sector, civil society, and so forth. And that's provided the results that I've laid out for you. On the other hand, when I look at what people are talking about with regard to the People's Republic of China, the PRC, or Russia, uh, you know, I'm left continually asking where exactly are the benefits of these relationships? Um, Tunisia has a massive trade deficit with the PRC because, like everywhere else, uh, the PRC sells lots of consumer products to Tunisia, but it doesn't seem to buy much of anything from Tunisia. So I don't see how that benefits Tunisia as well as it could, that relationship. And I see the same thing with Russia in terms of commercial purchases of wheat or with the PRC companies that come and build a piece of infrastructure. It's a commercial deal. It's not assistance. It's not given as a gift or a donation of any sort. So there have been some small projects here and there, but really nothing that I would say rises to the level of strategic. And so I don't see it as a strategic competition here right now, at least for the current period. But obviously, we expect Tunisia to have relationships with every country around the world. That's not only natural and normal, it's Tunisia's sovereign responsibility to be able to manage its relationships with everyone. But we want Tunisia to be able to have those relationships from a position of strength. So stability, security on its own territory, ability to export, and to, in some ways, dictate the terms of the relationships it's going to have. And we know from other experiences, debt trap diplomacy, for example, that that isn't always the case for other countries when they're dealing with the PRC. We just want to make sure that Tunisia remains as strong and as sovereign as it wants to be. So maybe that's a boring answer, but I just don't see a whole lot of strategic competition coming from those other areas. I just see a strategically important relationship for the United States and Tunisia, along with Tunisia's other traditional important partners, such as in Europe and Algeria and Canada and Japan, like I said before.
You've worked in some very impermissive environments, and you've worked in some very stable countries, and you've worked in some countries that were both very safe and secure and yet very restrictive in terms of what the embassies were able to do and not do. And now that you're in a place like Tunisia, I imagine that it's very liberating in a sense, being able to do your job and do it peacefully and productively. Um,
Mhm.
so maybe my question, what I'm trying to get at is what what do you like most that's most unique and different about being in Tunisia as a diplomat, as a senior diplomat? What do you enjoy
Mhm.
most about your job being there? Maybe it's getting outside the capital and being able to roam the provinces in a way you weren't able to do in some other places, or maybe it's
Mhm.
sort of the little niceties of being able to talk to the average man on the street that you couldn't have done in some of the places where you were posted. What what
Mhm.
what is unique about being a diplomat in Tunisia?
Well, for me at least, given where I've served before and just the circumstances of things, I will forever be grateful to the Tunisian people for having such a hospitable and open and welcoming country and society, because this is the first country in which I've served in which family and friends have been able to come and visit me regularly. In over 20 years before coming here, if you can believe it, Josh, the only visitors we just received visitors one time, and that was in Saudi Arabia. Uh, that was it. And here, my house is full practically the entire year, and I love it. Getting to help introduce people to Tunisian history, cuisine, the amazing landscape, and just the people out in the Medina, out in the historic sites. And that's something that no matter what else happens, I'll always be grateful for having served here. Uh, I think it is another element of our the strength of our bilateral relationship, despite the ups and downs, which are well known, that the government here is very supportive of my travel throughout the country. They always roll out the red carpet. I'm always greeted by governors, by people from the various ministries, depending on where I'm going, the projects I'm looking at. Um, and I'm really grateful for that. So I feel not only safe and secure, but I also feel supported in the sense that the government's going to be there to help answer questions and to partner with us, because we work with the private sector, we work with civil society, but we also have to work with the government to get things done here. And that's what we're doing. I've been to really the four corners of Tunisia. I haven't been to the internal center of the country as much as I'd like to be, but hopefully that's coming soon, especially with the cooler weather coming here very soon.
In a general sense, just to get back to North Africa as a regional picture, how much do you feel that Tunisia, uh, the economy, the migration, other issues, how much is it internal to the country, and how much of it uh, is influenced or exacerbated in some cases by the regional situation, by what's going on among the neighbors?
Mhm. Well, in that sense, we also have to think about what's going on in the Sahel,
Yeah.
where Wagner-inspired instability is all over, and that is part of what's driving people northward to try to reach Europe. And flows go, you know, migration flows change depending on lots of different situations. I think for a long time, Libya was one of the main pathways, as we know, but some of that shifted toward Tunisia over the past couple of years. Personally, I think because Tunisia historically has been a welcoming place for people from all different cultures. Um, but it's also a very short, relatively short distance from here to Italy. And so, you don't have some of the same challenges here as the irregular migrants have had in other places. But that places a large burden on Tunisia to try to figure out how to humanely manage this. And we're doing our best bilaterally, but also through UNHCR and our support to the International Organization for Migration to help people return home if they want to voluntarily return home, or to ask for refugee status if they feel that they can't go home, and to help Tunisia have the resources that it needs to take care of people while they're here. And on that note, I think the National Guard has done a lot to save lives in the sea. There were thousands of people, unfortunately, who died last year trying to make that voyage, and many fewer have died this year, according to all the reporting that we've seen. There are still lots of challenges, lots of things that can be done better, just like in our own country. But these are subjects of conversation with the Tunisians all the time. I think there is something, there are a number of things that are unique to Tunisia, but that are also shared among the countries of North Africa. But as you look historically for decades, Tunisia has had higher GDP per capita. It's had more entrepreneurship. It's had more Nobel Prize winners. I think there's just something about the conditions here that have caused Tunisians to need to and want to hustle. They have to. They don't have huge amounts of oil and gas. They need to rely on attracting people for tourism, attracting companies to invest here and manufacture and export. They have to rely on boosting their own agricultural production, no matter what the weather. They really have to rely on their own human resources. And they, over the years, have made really smart investments in education and healthcare. And I think that's paid off well for them. The challenge will be to continue those investments in a situation in which there's not a whole lot of money to invest. You mentioned the budget deficit. It's very problematic. But with our help and the help of its traditional partners, I do have optimism for Tunisia. I do think they're going to pull through, just as they have for centuries now.
If I can, just the last minute that we have, ask one more question, which you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but I think it might be fun if you have a general thought, not a specific thought, but just a general thought. And the question is, um, being an ambassador, is it all it's cracked up to be? I say that because, there's a lot of foreign service officers that enter the department every year, and it is an up or out system. I mean, you can stay at a level like an O1 or an O2 level for quite a number of years and make a wonderful career out of it. You can rise
Yep.
to be a consul general or a DCM or even a chargé, and you can have a wonderful life doing that. And many people do, but very few people get to reach the pinnacle and become an ambassador. And now that you've had a chance to do that, I'm wondering, what did you expect it would be like before you became an ambassador? And then did it
Mhm.
meet those expectations?
Mm. Well, that's something I think about from time to time, Josh, because it is quite a slog to get through the entire process of being selected and then being nominated and then going through the confirmation process and then being in the spotlight 24/7 once you do get to post, which means you're never on your own. You never go for a walk on your own to the bookstore or whatever. But it is the privilege of a lifetime. And there's a reason why when, as we all know, there are people in the political process that the administration comes to and says, well, how would you like to contribute to the newly elected president's administration? And a great number of them say, I'd like to be an ambassador. There's a reason why, because it's an amazing privilege to represent the American people and the US government overseas. Now, that said, in terms of the mechanics of the job, so far, I don't find it, frankly, hugely different from being a deputy chief of mission, a chargé when the ambassador is away. Um, just not seeing it, not yet. The work, I think, has to be complementary between an ambassador and a DCM. So if you've been a DCM, like I have several times, being an ambassador just isn't that big of a change, except in the sense that you are symbolically more important now. And people, no matter who you are, will listen to you differently than they do the deputy chief of mission or anyone else. They'll hear you differently, even if you say the same things. Um, and and when you show up to a place, at least in a country like Tunisia, it's a big deal. I often joke and say it's like the Queen of England, arriving somewhere. People notice. People will come up to you and give you a piece of their mind, for better or for worse. People will be happy that you stop into their shop. One of the biggest problems I have in this country is paying for anything. Nobody lets me pay for anything, and I have to insist. So if the negotiation gets really difficult, I send my wife in, and we usually win. But that's it just goes to show you that despite uh, misgivings that people may have, concerns people have about our policy in other places, in other ways, they still see the American ambassador as a very important thing and a very important role. And so, yeah, I would love it if the administrations, Republican and Democratic, and Senate majorities and minorities could work together to get ambassadors named and through the process a lot faster and to fill all of our positions a lot faster each administration, because these roles really, really are important for a number of reasons. Those are my general thoughts.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for watching us today. I appreciate it. Um, See everyone again soon.